Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Follow Up, and I'm here with Ryan, and we've just closed out our series, More Than Happy. It was kind of a 4-week series, talking about how, well, you give us a recap. You were the one that talked all the time, so you give us a recap about what this series was about.
Yeah, so it was in the book of Philippians. A guy by the name of Paul wrote this book from prison. He was chained next to a guard, and he's writing to this church in Philippi saying, hey, keep joy, keep joy. And the premise behind this series was, oftentimes we think, if I could just be happy, I just want to be happy, I just want to be happy, but happiness is situational. And so Paul is really encouraging his readers, encouraging us today that there's so much more than just happiness, that there's joy, because joy is this unconditional feeling that God's in control of your life. And so that's where we've been over the last 4 weeks. So we've been looking at that specifically.
Yeah, and it's been really great. It's funny that you mentioned, it made me think of this morning. I was on Twitter and I saw someone that was famous said, you know what, I'm tired of all these people around me. I'm just only going to do things that make me happy. That was the tweet. And the responses were people being like, this is the worst advice you could ever give someone, is just to pursue things that make you happy. And so it was kind of funny. I was like, hey, I need to send this dude like a link to the sermon series that we've been in. Yeah. So, but specifically this last week, we've been in the last, we were kind of in the middle part of Philippians chapter 3. We kind of like picked it up last week. So last week and this week, we talked about Philippians chapter 3. And so I'm going to read a couple of those verses. So verses 12 through 14. And so this is Paul again speaking, and he's kind of the one that talking through this. That, like Ryan mentioned, it says, "Not that I have already obtained all of this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken a hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus." And so we kind of ended last week with this and started this week, but Paul kind of starts by saying this thing of, not that I've already done all this or that I've arrived at my goal. And before this, he kind of gave basically his resume of why someone would think he has already obtained this,
for sure, and
why he's already got there. So why do you think Paul made it a point to start by talking about, not that I've obtained this?
Yeah, so Paul's life is interesting. If you've spent any time studying Paul's life, you understand that here's a guy who followed God in a way that most people would look at and go, man, this guy has done all of these things. He's accomplished all of this stuff. He's got all these accolades. He's got this reputation, but he wasn't following Jesus. He didn't know who Jesus was. And so he's saying, you know what, I want to know Christ in a greater way, because now that I've met Christ on the road to Damascus, now that I've actually seen him in all of his glory, I want to know him more. That everything that I've done, we talked about this last week, everything that I've ever done, I consider that garbage. I consider that rubbish in light of knowing who Christ is. So he says, I've not already attained knowing who Christ is. I want to know him more. I want to know him more. I want to know him more. Which is why I love what he says here, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. We talked about this a lot yesterday. And this was the thing that, as I talk to people at the door, a lot of times I'll stand at the door. When I get done preaching at Bellevue South, I'll just stand by the door, just talk to people, because I want to be approachable. I want to have a conversation with people and find out what hit or what didn't hit with people. And the conversations I had yesterday over and over and over again were the people who really honed in on those words, forgetting what is behind, forgetting my past, forgetting all of the things that I've carried in my past, whether it's sin or shame or guilt or pain or addictions, the things that maybe they've carried that thought, you know what, there's no way that God can forgive me of this stuff. There's not a single way that God would ever allow me to be having his grace in the midst of all this. And we talked about that in a way yesterday, where we told the story of Saul, who became Paul, who wrote Philippians chapter 3. You know, in Acts chapter 7, here's this guy who is standing there when Stephen gets stoned. You know, Stephen, the first martyr in the Christian faith, he's up preaching, gets done preaching this message, Stephen does, and the religious leaders drag Stephen out of the city walls. They stone him to death. Yeah. And Saul is there holding their coats, as if to say, you're not throwing the rocks hard enough. Let me hold your coats while you throw rocks at this guy even harder.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because Paul's life, like when he gives that resume at the beginning of that chapter, or I think maybe it was a little before that, but when he does that, it's even like, that was like the gold standard. Right? That was like, this is what it means to be a part of this community. And it's like, I think he realizes here is like, I've been running the wrong race.
Yes.
Like this is not this is the farthest thing that we should be. And we were kind of holding that up and also trying to get everyone to live up to this standard.
Right.
And it's just very, very problematic as you can see. So that's why, he says like, it's all trash. Like,
yes,
this is the opposite of what we should be focusing on. And what we should focus on is solely Jesus Christ.
Yes. Focus on what's in front of you, and he's basically saying that I've got a past that if God can forgive me, he can forgive you. So whatever you've been through, whatever you've done, whatever's going on in your world, if God can forgive me, he can forgive you. And so he's saying, forget about that past. Forget about what's behind you, whether it's good or bad. He brought up all of his accolades and all the things he's accomplished in his life. And he said, forget about that. That's all rubbish.
And not all of them are bad. A lot of it is like him like living out his faith and trying to like do it and try to do it to the best of his ability. But when you kind of hold on to the past, it's kind of like that guy that maybe like won a state championship in football,
I can throw a football
in high school. Yeah, like the high school quarterback that just can't like let it go and like. Yeah, but there's like other things going on now. Yeah, and you like keep bringing up like
you're 40.
Yeah,
so,
like this one time I went to this church camp and like it was amazing. It's like, hey,
I won the dodgeball tournament at this church. No, no one cares.
Yeah, no one cares. You probably should like move on to something. It's like don't always look at like your past accolades too, because like it's a faith journey, and that's kind of we kind of talked about that. But you shared this story about this guy named Dean at the beginning, and talking about like it doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you finish.
Yeah.
And so do you want to just kind of recap some of like what Dean did throughout his life?
Yeah, so the story I told yesterday is about a guy who turned 30 years old, and on his birthday, on his 30th birthday, he stumbles home from a bar next to his house, just drunk, and he stumbles home, sits on his porch, and he goes, man, I got to get my life together. Here I am, I'm 30 years old, I'm drunk, I'm in a dead-end job, and I'm not liking my life.
Yeah.
And so he says, today is the day, on his 30th birthday, it's close to midnight, today's the day I'm going to change my life. And so he strips down into his underwear.
As one does.
Yeah, I mean, logical choice, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna get control of my life.
Yeah, I don't get time to do this.
Yeah, I'm gonna get in my underwear. And so he gets in his underwear and he puts on some running shoes and he just goes for a run. And he runs for 30 miles. And his wife comes and picks him up and says, hey, did you realize you just ran for 30 miles? He has no idea that he did that because obviously he's drunk, but he realizes in that moment, I have a gift. I must have a gift. And so he then takes on this idea or this challenge of, I'm going to run 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. And he becomes the ultra marathon man is what he's called. And the premise behind what we talked about yesterday with the story of Dean Karnassus is no one would know who he is if he just started 50 marathons in 50 days in 50 states.
That's true, yeah.
We know who he is because he ran and completed 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. That's why we know him. That's why he won an SB in 2007. We know him because of what he accomplished. In the same way, it doesn't matter how we start in our life. If we can start well when it comes to our faith, we can. Man, I got baptized, and now that I'm baptized, I'm going to start well. I'm going to live well, and then we fall away from Jesus or whatever that looks like. It doesn't matter how we start. It matters how we finish. And Paul is pointing us to that finish line to say there is so much joy in the finish line, that we can find so much joy following Christ day in and day out. And that's why we forget about our past, whether it's good or bad. We forget about that because it doesn't matter how we started. It matters how we finish. We've got to continue to strain forward and continue to lean into what God has for us. Yeah,
and that was kind of the main idea that we settled around yesterday, is that the source of our joy is the finish line.
Yes.
And that's also like, that's the way Paul talks about it. There's a lot of imagery of kind of like running the race and the story, like I don't know exactly where it is. I'm kind of like not able to pull it up, but like the idea of like running the race with endurance and like kind of doing that and like persevering, but the idea of the finish line, it's not always it's not a destination. When it comes to our faith, it's like we will never reach the finish line here in our lifetime.
No.
And that's not the point. And I think that's the way Paul probably previously was living his life, is like, it is a finish line. It's to do all of these things. And once you do all these things, you've arrived. And that's the kind of part of like the flipping the culture of it on its head that Jesus did, is that it's not a destination. Right. It's about like this journey of like seeking and becoming more like Jesus, like living and loving like Jesus, as Jesus was like the perfect Israelite that like came to like do this for us. And so that's really, really cool. And so Paul's circumstances even kind of point to that not being the finish line, as he's talking about the amount of joy that he has as he's in prison.
Yeah. Here he is towards the end of his life. He's done all these things. He's been tortured for Christ. And here he is in prison, chained to this guard, and he's going, keep joy, keep joy,
yeah,
keep joy.
And he also doesn't see like he doesn't think that he's close to the finish line, because if he did, he probably would be like, They probably got it. I wrote this to them a couple different times.
Visited them. We're good.
I'm just going to take a little siesta here in this prison and just it's not an end goal that we're trying to strive to. And I think for some people that can be really frustrating because it's like in our culture, it's like we want to know, how do you know if you're winning? How do you know if you're excelling, if you're doing it? We want to get feedback. We want to know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And that's not really the way that our faith functions. So when we talk about like putting it into action, you kind of shared 3 things with us yesterday. And that first one is what the thing we're talking about right now is we're not there yet.
Yeah, we've not arrived.
Yeah, you've not arrived and you won't arrive. So don't be frustrated that you haven't arrived because you're not going to arrive.
Yep.
But there's the other 2 things that you said, direction matters and the prize is worth it. Can you dive into those 2 topics a little more for us?
Yeah, direction matters is simply this, that we have to keep looking forward, that it's not enough for us to continue to look back over our shoulder. I give the illustration yesterday of my daughter. Who's in track,
this is really good.
She's a long distance runner, and oftentimes when she runs, she'll look over her shoulder to see where her opposition is. How far in front of my opponents am I? And she loses momentum when she does that. And I think oftentimes in our life, we tend to look over our shoulder when it comes to the good or the bad. We look back over and over and over again, and we have to look forward. We have to continue to look forward. I gave a quote yesterday from Andy Stanley: direction, not intention, equals destination. I can intend to go someplace, but if I don't set the compass right or the map right, I'm not going to get there if I'm not going the right direction. So we have to understand that direction does matter. And that's what Paul's saying is we have to keep our face forward, focused on the finish line, because the prize is worth it. The prize of being called heavenward is worth it. No matter the circumstances that we go through in this world, no matter what we're going through every day in and day out. It could be a day. It could not be a day. I don't know. But whatever happens for us, the prize is worth it.
And that's something that I think, I've had a lot of conversations with people, and I'm sure you've been in ministry for a long time. I'm sure you have the same thing as well. But of people like that's a big obstacle for them, even to get through. I just don't think God could love me because of X.
Right.
And that is the epitome of like direction matters. Like when we're solely focused on the things in our past that we've done, in the ways that we feel unworthy, in the ways that we feel like God is mad at us for, right? Like when we start to envision that and that to be like our sole focus that we frame up God through, then we're not able to move anywhere.
Right.
And so we're just kind of only staring backwards. And that's why Paul's trying to get us to continue to look forward. Like it doesn't matter what you've done behind you, whether it's good or probably especially if it's bad,
right? Because
that just becomes like a hurdle in your way that you're now, instead of just running, you're now having to jump over things and being chained to things that you're pulling alongside of you. Right. And the freedom of Christ is what releases you just to allow you to run and also just not worry about where everyone else is.
Right.
And so that's actually why I know, to stay on the running metaphors, I have to like think about running through the framework of like, when I do a race, I'm not racing really against other people. I'm not the fastest person out there. So there's no point. So my goal is not to be first place in the half marathon because I'm not going to win.
Right.
The race is really with myself mentally to can I do better than what I did last time?
Can I just get better?
Can I get better last time? And like, how am I improving? And so kind of also like, not looking at the other people in the race, because that's not helping me be like, in the phrase a lot in the racing community is like, run your race.
Right.
Like you got to just do that. And Scott shared this, like one of the greatest comebacks. He kind of shared them of like the guy that was super behind and then came back. And in interviews, when he did that, he's like, I ran my race. Everyone sprints at the beginning to get placement, and I just saved my energy, because when you start a race sprinting, you lose a lot of momentum.
You could say that it's not how you start.
You could say it's not how you start. It's how you finish. And so the last one we talked about, number 3, was the prize is worth it. And so can you give us a little more insight about what Paul is talking about here? Yeah,
he's talking about just that relationship with Jesus. He's talking about being called heavenward. And so as we look into our own life and straining towards that, we want to live a life that God calls us heavenward. We want to live a life that every single day we're getting better and better in following him. And so for us, we have to understand that the prize is worth it. To know him, to be Christ-like, to live and love like him. That prize is worth it every single day, not just when we get to heaven. I think a lot of times we get confused about like the prize is heaven. The prize is heaven on earth too.
Yes.
So we need to live on earth like we're going to live in heaven. And so to live and love like Jesus every day on this earth as well. The prize for that is worth it, and the prize will definitely be worth it in heaven itself.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a big misconception that happens in the Christian world, is that we're waiting for heaven. We're waiting for this fulfillment thing to come. But the reality is we get to be a part of the new creation right now.
Right.
Like building heaven on earth right now in our communities. Naomi and I think maybe I've told you this story. We worked in the mountains in Colorado, and so we were pretty far from anything, and we found a church that was like 40 minutes away, and we're like, oh, we can go there on a Sunday morning. We went there, and before it started, it was just this super small church, and this guy was handing out like these flyers about how the government is all this stuff, right?
Okay.
But the whole idea, he said, hey, we just have to persevere till the end, as if heaven is like the goal.
Right.
And I was like, relationship with God, being in God's presence is the goal,
yes.
which is heaven,
yes.
but also can be now. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of the clarification of what's the expectation. Like we're not waiting for a retirement plan.
Not at all.
To check out. We get to have the opportunity to do that now, which is really cool. And that's what Paul's talking about when he says the prize is worth it. You can begin living this life now, which is how you have joy regardless of circumstances.
Exactly right. It's
so kind of back.
He's in control.
Mm-hmm, yeah, so that's kind of back. And we've kind of been in this quote. I want to read it one more time because we've been talking about this quote from Rick and Kay Warren throughout this series. It says, joy is the settled assurance that God is in control of all of the details of my life. The quiet confidence that ultimately everything is going to be all right, and the determined choice to praise God in every situation. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but that is much easier said than done.
Absolutely.
In that topic. But man, what a picture of joy is being the settled assurance that God is actually in control, and what that would look like if we really lived in that knowledge.
For sure.
And so the last thing I want to end on today, you shared this thing towards the end of kind of Paul said, the one thing I do is forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. So how can you help us frame that up for kind of like a practical, this is how we do this in our everyday life?
Yeah. For me, straining is hard. Mm-hmm. Specifically in the Christian world, following Jesus world. Like I strain for a lot of things, mm-hmm. and I'm sure you do as well. Mm-hmm. You give me a goal, you give you a goal, we're going to go get that goal. We're going to do whatever we can to get that goal, whether it's running or whether it's getting this project done or whatever that mm-hmm. looks like. For me, straining is easy. It's in the everyday life of getting in the Word every single day. I have a hard time straining in that. And so mm-hmm. I need people in my life. I need people who will lean into my life and say, what are you reading? What are you studying? What are you going through in your world? Yeah. I need people who are asking me what my prayer life looks like. I need people in my life. We have to have people in our life who are helping us live Christ-centered lives, mm-hmm. who will lean in and say, are you straining in this? Yeah. That will constantly lean into us. And mm-hmm. I think that's probably the most practical way
for sure
is to find people in your life, whether they're a church member at Calvary or not, mm-hmm. That will lean into you and say, hey, are you straining in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way?
Yeah, there's like this, like the rule of 7 of like you become like the 7 people you spend the most time with in your life. And so whether that's good or not, and that's kind of why at Calvary we say we value helping one another live a Christ-centered life, is because we're not meant to do this on our own. And living and loving like Jesus is significantly harder on an island.
Yes.
And so we are like kind of called to be in this community, and that's what I love about Calvary. Our mission is to live and to love like Jesus, and that's really kind of like the focus of connecting us together so that we can run this race together.
That's right.
And so it feels like, we are running this race together, but when you look to the side and you see someone in the weeds with you alongside, it makes it that much easier and also encourages you to help moving forward. So looking ahead, where are we going next? I know we're starting this new series called All the Time this next week. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is going to be about?
Yeah, so it's on one of our values. So one of our values here at Calvary is to love God with all of who we are all of the time. Mm-hmm. And it's born out of a time where a religious leader comes to Jesus and says, hey, what's the greatest commandment of all? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so we're going to spend some time over the course of the next week talking about what does it look like to love God? Mm-hmm. What does it look like to love God with all of our heart? What does it look like to love God with all of our mind, with all of our strength? So that's where we're going to be the next 3 weeks. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So this is, you said a 3-week series that we're going to be starting. Yeah, and so this is it's going to be great. And I love the way that we ended this series. I loved the way it started, and it just really like connected really well. I'm excited to start this next one, as this is a great topic. That's another thing. Like when Jesus says, love everyone with love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, you're like,
what does that mean?
Okay. Yeah. It's like,
and
even like when you think about it, you're like, yeah, it sounds like, oh, you can say it in a sentence. That sounds easy, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's a little more complicated. So we're going to be unpacking that in the next couple weeks. But thank you everyone for joining us for a follow-up today. We look forward to seeing you right here next week.